Hey guys, Ledin here, and I'm a therapist, and usually I do funny videos about therapy, but today I'm going to talk about death and grief. Unfortunately, in my own family and in the small community that I'm from, we've experienced a lot of death, um, and so I was talking to a family member about it. I said, I think I'm feeling this calling to do a video on death, and she says, oh, please do one. So that was my confirmation. So when when somebody dies, or maybe they even get a terminal illness diagnosis, that's when we start kind of going through the stages. Now, what the stages I'm describing are the 5 stages of loss and grief by Kubler-Ross. Um, Her work is, widely accepted in the therapy community. Oftentimes, we first feel denial. I think of that as kind of a survival mechanism where something very tragic just happened or we just heard some terrible news and our body kind of numbs us. And in that numbing, we deny it. We're like, no way could that have happened. I just saw that person. Or I feel healthy. How can I have this terminal illness diagnosis? So it's normal to feel that denial, especially in the beginning. And then we move on to anger, usually. And that could be feeling angry that we got the diagnosis. We might feel angry at God. How could you give me this diagnosis? Feeling angry at the person who actually is deceased. I see this a lot, especially when a person has died by suicide. Their family members come in feeling that anger, and then they feel guilt about the anger, and it's all normal. It's all part of the process. You'll hear me talk a lot about not judging your feelings, and so especially not when we're talking about death. We go into bargaining. So this is where a lot of guilt comes in. If I would have only called him, maybe he'd still be alive. If I would have waited a few more minutes before they got in the car, we might bargain with God of, I just got this terminal illness diagnosis. God, if you give me a miracle and let me live through, I will devote my life to serving you and serving people. We're bargaining and feeling a lot of guilt. And again, that's a normal, unfortunate part of the process here. Depression is another stage that we often go through. How can I go on living? I don't even know how to put one foot in front of the other right now. I feel completely empty, lost. I don't know what to do without this person. We all go through that when we experience that loss. It's a very real part of the grieving process. Where we hope to get to is a level of acceptance. And I think some people, especially if the grief is really fresh for you right now, like it is unfortunately for many people in my community, the acceptance isn't saying that, okay, I accept, it's fine, it happens. Acceptance is more of when we get to the point where we can say, my life is not going to be the same. There is a hole, but I can move on and I can accept that my life is going to be different. I can accept that I'm going to have to find a new routine, a new way of life. That's when we reach kind of the acceptance phase. Now, these stages don't necessarily go in the order that I just talked about them in. You might feel like you've reached acceptance and then the anniversary date of the death comes up and now we're back in the depression. That's pretty normal for you to come in and out of different stages. There's no set time frame that you should be in a certain stage. Denial might only be seconds, or it might be, a day. So there's not a set time frame for that either. Different people are going to grieve differently. You might have 2 siblings that lose a parent, and one is showing their grief completely different. That's normal too. Their relationship with that parent might have been very different, and they're very different people, the siblings themselves. So the way that they process it, and maybe one's in this stage and one's in this stage, all very normal and acceptable. When someone dies, we often kind of reflect on our own life and evaluate how are we living, what do we want, what does death really mean? And so we might seek out, things like videos like this, or support groups. Support groups can be fantastic because other people have experienced similar loss, and hearing how they have been living and surviving through it can be very helpful for you, especially if it's a new loss or new diagnosis. So I'd really recommend something like that if you do feel like you are being stuck in a certain stage and you want to move to the next stage. So now I want to talk about kids and loss. The way kids handle grief, very different than the way we handle grief and loss. Even if there's been no close deaths in your family, kids are not completely shielded from death. I mean, if they watch Disney movies, they've seen it. Maybe there's a hunter in the family and they have some kind of basic understanding of what that means. They might walk outside and see a dead bird. So they have some kind of basic understanding. And so when something like this happens, it's kind of, our role to help support them through some of those feelings, instead of trying to shield them from it and pretending like it didn't really happen, or ignoring that it happened, because death is a very real part of life. And we'll talk a little bit more about how kids process that. Pets are often one of the first ways that a lot of kids experience death. And let me tell you, that is a real loss for children. I can't tell you how many times I often ask kids to draw a family picture. They almost always draw their pet in the picture. And I've had many kids actually draw deceased pets up in the sky because they'll talk about how they had this dog and now it's in heaven. So when a child loses a pet, it is a real deep emotional thing, and we want to be sensitive to that too, but that could be a whole nother video. Kids grieve very differently than we do. They may be playing, which is a great coping skill, by the way. They may be playing with toys one minute and then crying, and because something reminded them of their loved one that just passed. So that stuff like that might happen. Some kids regress for a short period of time. Maybe they start bedwetting and they stopped that already, or start sucking their thumb. All kind of part of the kids' process. To help kids, having them, especially young kids, if they can't really verbalize things, or you can tell they don't really understand, death fully, just drawing a simple picture of maybe a heart, and talk about, how we love the person who's no longer with us, or draw a family picture. Things like that can be very helpful for young kids. In my experience, talking about death with children, it's important to be direct and loving. So by direct, I'm meaning we don't want to tell them that their loved one went to sleep, for example. That can kind of create some scary feelings about going to sleep, because my grandma went to sleep and she never woke up. What does that mean for you to go to sleep tonight, Mom, or myself? So we want to be direct and real with them, but also very loving, and maybe not explaining all the details of it given their age. Kids also seem, at least many of the kids I've worked with, seem to be able to handle it and process it in a way that's so beautiful to watch. Many of the kids I work with, their parents and family do have a Christian background, and so they'll tell me, yeah, I know it's really sad that Grandma died and I'm going to miss her, but I'm going to see her in heaven one day. And that can really help them. For families that don't believe in a traditional God, maybe planting a tree and letting them know that this is in memory of them, making a scrapbook together, talking about how they're still alive in our hearts and in our minds, can be very comforting to a child and help them move through the grief process. Funerals. I often get asked, should I let my kid go to the funeral or not? That is a very personal decision, but if you are asking my opinion, I say yes, do let the child go to the funeral. You never want to force them. If they say, no, I don't want to go to the funeral, don't make them. But before you, if you decide, yep, we're going to go to the funeral, and they're like, okay, we're going to the funeral, they don't really understand, but you do have to explain that a little bit to them of what they're going to see. You're going to see some very sad people because the funeral is a time for us to remember our loved one who has passed away. You're going to see lots of pictures of your aunt or uncle or whoever it was that passed away. And those are good memories for us. If there's an open casket, you definitely want to explain that to the child too. I know the first funeral I took my kids to that had an open casket, my son didn't want to go up to the casket, but my daughter did. And so I was totally fine with that and let them each do their own thing. But again, preparing them of what you think that they're going to see and maybe what they feel. Also letting them know, hey, if it's a really young child, there might be a kind of a boring time for you where everyone's sitting and quiet, but we need to be respectful and sit and be quiet. So preparing them for everything to do with the funeral. And then lastly, we gotta remember we're dealing with kids. So this is a true story about my son with the very first funeral that I took him to. There ended up not being an open casket, but I did everything I was just explaining where, I was preparing him that, hey, we might see their dead body, but their soul's gone, and how I explained it. And he is like, oh, well, if her body is there, who shot her? And so my initial reaction is alarm, but he was 3. And so I had to realize, take a deep breath and not freak out on him or let him know my own emotions, and realize, okay, maybe I haven't explained death very well to him. And so through playing with Nerf guns or maybe something you saw on TV, he's associated death with being shot. So that was a good learning opportunity for me to explain that, sometimes when people are really old, they just kind of stop breathing. And so I was able to explain that to them. But so remembering their kids, odd things might come out of their mouth, and that's okay. That's a learning experience. So that's it. That's my video for today, and I hope that it can truly bring you some comfort and understanding of this horrible time. So thanks, guys. Take care.